Hey everyone, just a quick update. Around the 20-minute mark of the conversation, the audio became deteriorated during the recording process. We apologize for this, but believe the conversation will more than make up for it. Now here's today's episode with Sarah and Sean.
I think it didn't end up being like too crazy of a design, but maybe one of the funnier types of constraints I've had on a project were like for kind of a rural Alberta agricultural and like animal health college campus. We were, doing some renovations to part of a existing building on their campus and like helping to do the civil engineering for a new building. And some of the constraints were like, oh, well, this is a barn door, and so cows will be coming out of here. And so like the minimum grade is less. And so it didn't end up being a really crazy design, but just like this is kind of the first time I've had constraints like from an agricultural, like, animal point of view.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the workshop presented by Applin Martin. In today's episode, we sat down with Sarah Kean and Sean Wilkinson of our Calgary office. Sarah and Sean combined for over 15 years of experience with Applin, filling a variety of roles along the way. In this episode, they share their journey as they navigate the dynamics of a growing office and becoming team leaders for both fellow employees and clients alike. It was a great conversation, and I hope you all enjoy.
Before we get into today's episode and kind of our topics, why don't you guys give me a little bit about your introduction and your roles, a little bit of your experience, history.
I work out of our Calgary office. I've been there for almost 9 years now, project manager. I've done pretty much every role in our office, from inspections, contract admin, design, and now project management.
Sarah, I've been at Applin for just over 4 years now. I actually started kind of right when I was getting my PEng in Alberta. So started as a design engineer and then moved up through project engineering and then now project management within the last year. So it's been a really good experience and lots of growth in the 4 years I've been there.
Awesome. And you guys both mentioned off air that you're not actually originally from Calgary. You guys want to get into that a little bit?
No, I'm originally from Newfoundland, and when I first moved to Calgary, I explained my background, and I was called an East Coast mutt, which I think is kind of fitting, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, born in Newfoundland, lived in PEI, New Brunswick, back to Newfoundland, and then eventually out to Calgary, so yeah.
And I'm myself from Ontario. I grew up in a little town called Stratford. Worked in Kitchener-Waterloo for 8 years and then decided to make the move west.
Awesome. How and why engineering?
Basically, I was looking for an opportunity outside of school. The military was kind of the way that I wanted to go. My parents said, definitely get an education. And then if you want to join the military, go for it. So I went and got an education and never followed up on the military. And trying to choose what I wanted to do, always look for something that, would never go out of style, was sort of recession-proof, and engineering is where that lay. So, I've got into it and never looked back.
I got into engineering was kind of the typical, like, I'm good at math and science in high school. Yeah, so math and science in high school, and then I wanted to do something like go to university where I'd only need 1 degree and I could get a job. And so I was like, engineering, and I had no idea what engineers actually did. And I applied to one program at one university. My parents were like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But it worked out. And then, I got into civil specifically because of like the head of departments at my university gave presentations on like what courses you can take for certain disciplines and what careers you could get out of it. And I was kind of like, if people need a road to drive on and a toilet to flush, like if I do civil, I should always be able to find a job, which has largely been true. So.
Okay, very cool. So it's definitely interesting that no pre-existing, I guess, introduction to it through like family members or something like that, right? Because a lot of times in previous episodes, I was saying my grandfather, that's kind of how I was introduced into it. But it's super cool kind of to see that people want to just fall into it and haven't been, I guess, influenced into it, that you had interest in engineering and what we do kind of through other avenues. So.
Right. Yeah.
I did work in construction out of high school, built barns, formed a lot of concrete. I did like construction, but didn't want to be on the bottom end of things.
You wanted to be the guy that actually told told them what to build versus.
Yeah, I knew that 30, 40 years of slugging concrete forms was not going to be too good on my body, so I decided to be on the upper echelon of things.
Very cool. So now, piggybacking off of that, obviously before you kind of get to the slugging concrete and all that, there's the design of that. In each of your own words, can you guys kind of describe how, from the start of when you're doing the design, how it kind of comes to fruition to the end of it? Like, what is the design process to you?
Initially, it's gathering all of the relevant and available information, so that you can really process what the dynamics of the project are. What are your constraints? Where do you have some opportunities? What the client wants, what their vision is, how does this relate to past projects? How can you apply previous experiences and mistakes, I guess, to better future projects? And so you kind of take a look at all that information, come up with a conceptual design, take that to the client, run through a few different iterations on that, and in a very high level come up with essentially get their sign off on, this is heading in the right direction. That gives you a little bit of surety in the end product that you're giving them what they want, and then you can take it to that next level. So adding a bit more detail, working through some of the challenges, conflicts, problems, that kind of thing, and then ultimately to the final design.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I largely agree with everything that Sean said there. I think the biggest thing for me, as I've kind of gotten more into in the past year, the project management and being involved from earlier on, is kind of figuring out with the client what their big significant important things are to them, and what the biggest design constraints are to us, and then kind of being upfront with that to because that's usually the biggest issue is they want something and you're kind of looking at it being we
might not actually be able to do that fancy fountain in the middle of your...
We'll try our best, or communicating with a client hey, I know you said this was really important, or you really wanted retaining walls, or you really didn't want retaining walls, but this might be a different option, and just presenting them with something different, or pointing out hey, what you want is the more expensive option, and then they might be oh, actually it's not that important, right? So just kind of that open communication at the start of the design process is really important, I think.
Yeah. And again, we don't only just work directly with the clients, right? A lot of it comes through different collaboration, not only with your own team, but also with other outside consultants, whether it's hydrology, structural, environmental. Can you guys speak to a little bit about that, how you handle that part of the design process, dealing with not only the clients, but say 5, 6, 7 different consultants that are going to have all of this input onto one project?
Yeah, I think for the projects that we do in Calgary anyway, the architect would be the other consultant that we work with the most and would definitely impact our design the most. So typically for Calgary projects, the architect would be the main consultant and we would be brought on under them as a sub-consultant on their team. And they have a pretty big impact on... thing that bothers me the most is when they change the location of doors.
Oh yeah, it seems so simple. It seems so simple on paper, but that little 5.
And one project was oh, it's not. We made some minor changes. We just mirrored all the buildings, so it's a row of townhouses, and the doors were all on this, one side.
All they did was move them,
and then they mirrored them, so then the doors on the other side, and that can really impact grading design. So that's working with architects. Really, it's interesting what they do, but they can really not be aware of the changes they're making, really impact us, and vice versa, I'm sure.
Yeah, and within Calgary, we have pretty strict stormwater regulations, everything from rate and volume controls to quality controls of stormwater. So being involved with the geotech and getting their input early in a project is key for us in understanding what the constraints are. Calgary and area is generally a clay material, which they just refer to as common material because it's so ubiquitous throughout that area. That there's very little infiltration. So we have to look for other opportunities, whether that's, searching out bedrock or, there are some river valley areas that are high in gravel content, so they will get a higher infiltration rate. So, you could be same specifications or same requirements for 2 different projects, but they're in 2 different locations, and one is very tough to design for, and the other one is a breeze. So understanding those requirements and those constraints early is another key component to the overall cost and complexity of these projects, because we end up having large stormwater tanks within these projects. And they're very expensive.
Very expensive.
And they're not pretty, and nobody likes them, and nobody ever sees them.
Everyone always points at that
The most expensive.
that ugly black shaded box on your drawing. We don't want that.
No, exactly.
Yeah, probably the most expensive thing on a project, and it's underground and nobody sees it.
And nobody sees it. Yeah. Now moving on from the outside consultants, now let's talk about your team internally yourself. Do you guys still like to get your hands dirty with a little bit of design? Can you guys speak to a little bit more your own design techniques and what you guys like to do? I know you guys are both now project management level, so it may not be day to day doing the grading, doing the servicing yourselves, but can you speak to a little bit about that?
It's pretty much the opposite. I've gotten more into it as I got higher. It just, I think that's the nature of just the size of our office, and that, you know, we're under 20 or just about 20 people now. So you can't hide in a corner. You can't do one role. Everybody has to be multidisciplinary, just in the nature of having a smaller office. And I think that adds to a bit of your learning process as you go through your career. You get to experience a number of different things, from design to inspection, to a bit of management, coordination with different consultants and stuff. So, I find that I'm still very heavy into design. And I think Sarah would agree with that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think, just to reiterate what Sean said, like, our office is on the smaller side. And so, you know, we're doing project management, but also still trying to do some of the, you know, the detailed design of projects as well. And then an interesting part is now trying to, like, train up kind of more junior staff that are really keen on learning design.
Yeah.
And then having to explain how you do design is kind of like, you know, you've been doing it for a while. So it's kind of, but to stop and pause to think of, like, why did I do it that way, to explain it to a junior staff? It's been like,
you're almost like two different languages, right? You
Exactly.
How can I make my brain understands it?
Yeah.
But how can I make somebody else who may not have seen or has obviously not seen what I've seen and design what I'm designing? How do I make them understand it?
Yeah. And then I find, like, you know, it's still like, I feel like it's kind of, you try to take things from other projects, but each site is different. Each project is different. So it's like one size fits one.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, you only get better at design the more you're doing it. And so as you're more experienced, maybe if you do have a junior staff that's working on design, but it's a bit more complex, then they come to Sean or I'd be like, hey, I don't know what to do here. Or, like, you know, Sean's more experienced than I am. So sometimes I'm stumped and I'm like, hey, Sean, like, you know, how do I work around this, you know?
Yeah.
And so him and a couple others in the office have some really good experience too. So.
Okay, so do you guys then cross over on a lot of projects? Do you guys circ to each other? How does that work during the design process? Do you guys mingle a little bit about them, or?
Absolutely. Yeah. I find leaning on your peers to not only confirm some of your assumptions, agree with, you know, or give you or disagree with some of your assumptions or some of your design choices, gives you a leg up, or maybe they might see something in the design that you never really thought about. And that gives you, it can't hurt. So, you know, having that collaboration and just trying to lean on your peers to help you out is the biggest thing, to ensure that, you know, we're heading in the right direction. You haven't made a mistake and you've gone 10 steps down and now you need to go back to step one because you didn't think of X, Y, and Z. That, you know, if I had just gone to Sarah and said, well, what about this? She would have said, oh, you know, make sure you've done this. Oh, I didn't. Okay, well, let's change that.
Yeah, and I find, because, like, day to day, like, we would, you know, typically be managing separate projects, but if we're, like, involved in the design, or if the client has a weird ask or something, then it's kind of like, if you have to think outside the box, and then you're like, I don't know if this idea is crap or, like, really smart, you know? And so to kind of go to your peers to bounce those ideas off so they can tell you, you know, give their 2 cents and kind of move forward from there.
Yeah, I definitely think we call it a circ in Toronto, but I don't know, you guys might have a different word for it, but I think the circ, basically where you kind of peer review or you send a review even before you actually submit it, I think it's probably one of the most important steps, not more so even just like for a mistake check, but just like, okay, here's kind of what I did. Let me see what you think. Do you agree or not? Or even if you disagree, is there a different way you see that we might be able to achieve kind of the end goal? in a more efficient or better fashion. So you guys mentioned before that Calgary's a little bit of a smaller office. Is there any challenges that you guys think you had going through the design process as a smaller office? With it, like, say, for example, like if there's tighter timelines or something like that, or different experiences that you might have had?
I think with the smaller office, it's, we have quite a bit of work for the size of our office. And so everyone's pretty busy. And so, you kind of try to set up your week as best you can. Like, I don't know, if the Toronto office does this as well, but we have like a Monday meeting with the team to kind of prioritize workloads. And then by Monday afternoon, it's, different clients have asked for different things. And so I think just trying to juggle the resources given how busy you are and how many projects. And then also trying to find time to help, train people and, if people express interest in learning about something else, trying to find that time as well when everyone's kind of trying to get everything done, so quickly, and fighting over resources really is probably the biggest challenge, I would think.
Yeah, and I find just because we are so small, and everybody has to take vacations, but when people go away on vacations, especially some of the more senior people, that's a huge part of your upper echelon that you've just lost for a week or 2 weeks or however long they're gone. And, so it is there's a lot less people to kind of fill that role and take that on. So it is a bit more challenging that way. But yeah, other than that, I think I agree with everything Sarah said. Like, there's not too much difference. I've worked in a larger office as well as small. You end up with the same issues. It's mostly just, somebody takes sick or somebody goes on vacation, and now we have to scramble to kind of find and fill in those places. And you can't have too many people off at once as well, right? Like, summertime is a busy time. If you have 3, 4, 5 people off, we always try to avoid that as much as we can. But people want their time off, and the summertime is always busy, and so there are periods where you might have 3 or 4 people off at a time in an office of 16 to 20, and that's a huge resource suck for us, really.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think just, again, going through now, hearing multiple different guests and hearing their opinion, it sounds like communication's kind of just like an overlapping topic, basically, about how to make the process, whether it's you're talking about pre-design, design, just overall development. It sounds like communication definitely is just like a mainstream kind of to make the project the most efficient. Do you guys have a trick that you guys like to do to communicate better within your office? Is there something you guys do specifically that you would say works the best?
I appreciate phone calls. It's in the world of technology, people get so caught up in sending emails,
texting,
whatever, right? And it's, it's great and easy, but there's a lot that you can communicate through a conversation, a 10-minute conversation that you could never get down onto a piece of paper, or, in an email or a text or whatever. So, and then, you get a bit of a opportunity to, hey, what'd you do this weekend? What are you doing next week? And what are your holiday plans? You get that a little bit of a personal feel to it as well. So, the phone calls and even better in-person communication is even better, just to help facilitate those conversations and expand on things. You'd be surprised how quickly it rolls into something else, and we were talking about this, and now we're talking about something completely different, and that rolls in, and then somebody else joins in, and they give their input.
And that always sticks with you, right?
Yeah.
Like anytime you hear something else, or even just you hear, say, for example, overhear someone from another desk, right? It could be like, oh, wow, I was actually thinking about that the other week, and like I never thought of it that way, right? So just overlapping conversation kind of. Right?
I think just like the opportunity, like if you're having an in-person meeting or like, a Teams meeting, versus just, things being communicated through email, is that it gives people the opportunity to kind of jump in with their opinion on things. And so you can hash out issues a lot faster rather than like scrolling through some big email chain of like, well, this is what I think, and this is what Sean thinks, and this is what you think. And, it can kind of take a while, and it gets tedious to read through all that text to kind of figure out what the best option is. And I also find like if it's, you need to communicate something that's maybe not so great news for a client, or, like a hard thing to discuss with a coworker or something, it's like, people I find if they send an email when they're kind of upset about something, it comes across a lot harsher than like
than a phone call.
People aren't as mean to your face usually. Sometimes, but usually, so it kind of helps. And like Sean said, that bit about like, how was your weekend? Like, kind of you can smooth things over if it's a troubling issue that you have to discuss or a hard topic. Yeah.
Very good. Now a little bit more getting back to kind of the engineering design portion of this. Is there a part of the design process that you would say you enjoy the most? Now, would it be enjoying that, okay, I love just trying to figure out, okay, we have this big stormwater pond, how can we actually construct it? Or I really, really enjoy a large plot of land and I prefer to do subdivision design. Is there a design that you would specifically say is your niche and that you would look forward to doing?
I really like the conceptual portions of the job. I like kind of what we talked about earlier, taking the vision, taking the existing information, sorting through all the details and facts and constraints, and coming up with those ideas. That's my favorite part, is like think inside the box, and once you've exhausted that, then start moving outside the box and looking at other opportunities. I think that's the most fun. And then you start to get into the nitty-gritty details of everything and all the calculations and the less sexy, less sexy portions of
the part nobody skip, right? But that's the one where we pay the most attention to. They like to see the big tower. And everything in between is funny.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably why a lot of people go into this, industry, or at least stay in this industry. It is kind of like a fun problem-solving type of job to have, right? So I think, to speak to what Sean said, is like that conceptual part where it's like, well, here's my ideas and here's your ideas and here's what the architect wants and here's what the developer wants, and trying to piece that puzzle together to like ideally get the most people, like all or at least a bit of what they were hoping to get out of the project. I think that kind of team effort, bringing everything together, problem solving, is the most interesting. And then when it all works out, if you're doing the details and then it's like, oh, everything works perfectly, rarely happens.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's never the one where you go A to Z without skipping.
Yeah.
So, what was the most crazy or most unconventional design you would say you've done, that you've been a part of? Could be in Calgary, could be if you worked other places as well.
Yeah, we did a project many years ago in Kitchener, and it was my previous company had specialized in roundabout design, and so at any intersection that was going to be redeveloped within the region, they would look at doing a roundabout first. Once they eliminated that potential for a roundabout, then you could move on to other design styles. But this one had a particularly high rate of speed and a high fatality at that intersection. Probably like, I don't know what it was, like 4 or 5 deaths a year or something like that. And it was 80 kilometers an hour. So it was high risk for fatality. So anyway, it was really close to an on and off ramp for an expressway. So we ended up doing 2 3-lane roundabouts right beside each other that fed the expressway as well. So we had not only the interchange to worry about, we had existing big box stores, we had land expropriation that we had to do, and then it was a big challenge to educate the public on how to use these type of designs, because they had right turn bypass lanes, just the signage, how to take pedestrians through it. There's a school down the road, so there was a worry about children and parents and people picking, like, just a high pedestrian traffic through that area, and how do you mitigate the risk of pedestrian vehicle interaction. So those were a lot of the different challenges. Thankfully, the region that we worked for was very progressive and was willing to take different design elements and different design ideas to help alleviate that, i.e. raised crossings for pedestrians and stuff like that. So it was quite a challenge. And even after we had constructed it, we still made some, we reevaluated how it worked, made some changes to some of the paint markings. Like I said, we raised some of the pedestrian crossings and stuff, and it was a very sizable project, and I had worked on it for 5 years and then built it just before moving out to Alberta. So it was kind of one of those like feather in the cap projects for me, and it sticks with me as being something completely different than most of the stuff we do.
Yeah, I think it didn't end up being like too crazy of a design, but maybe one of the funnier types of constraints I've had on a project were like for kind of a rural Alberta agricultural and like animal health college campus. We were, doing some renovations to part of a existing building on their campus and like helping to do the civil engineering for a new building. And some of the constraints were like, oh, well, this is a barn door, and so cows will be coming out of here, and so like the minimum grade is less. And so it didn't end up being a really crazy design, but just like is kind of the first time I've had constraints like from an agricultural like animal point of view for weird specific things.
That is things you never actually
think. I was like, oh yes, all right, okay.
Yeah, we had a similar one in Ontario. I remember one of the it was at a council meeting, and somebody brought up the crowd. They're like, oh, well, what about if the geese are going to fly into the building when they're trying to go through, like when because they're used to a certain height of building, but now you want to put up an 8-story condominium. What are the geese going to do? And it was something you never actually thought about or as a constraint, right? And you're kind of stumped when you actually hear that question because it's something you've never totally heard about, right? But that kind of thing sticks with you, and it's like comes up as like a talk point every now and then. What would you say after your craziest design now? What would you say was your welcome to engineering moments during a design process throughout your career? One that was more of like a crazy thing that sticks with you, or if, like you said, the funny experience that sticks with you. Now, what was one that you could look back and always use like as a lesson? This is something that happened to me, or this is something that will always stick with me as okay, now I'm like here and I'm actually doing my own design and work.
I think like I remember like one of kind of the more complex grading designs I had to do. I kind of got into the weeds of the design a little too early.
Okay.
And so it was a multifamily private site. And so it was a lot of row townhouses, and everything on these private sites, at least in Calgary, they're trying to cram as much as they can onto the site. And so everything is so tight together, and, it's kind of still a preliminary stage of the design. And I was just trying to figure out how it was all going to work. And I just went so into the weeds of the details. And then, like I mentioned previously, like the architect was like, oh, actually, we're going to change how many units are in each building, where the doors are and everything. And then I just had to spend so much time like redoing my own work and like at my own fault, because I just spent so much time up front just doing such detail that I did not need to be doing. And so now I'm always kind of like, if I find myself going down that rabbit hole, I'm like, wait, don't waste your time. Like, do you need to be doing this right now, or is kind of high level where you need to keep it? So
yeah, and that's something I always think about too, even now, is like I do my own designs, or I'm helping somebody else do their own designs. If you find yourself spending 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes on one feature line trying to tweak one elevation to make sure you're only 0.1% away, take a step back, zoom out of the actual problem.
Yeah.
Is it really worth it to get that, or is it something else issue that's kind of going on around your problem?
But I find like in COVID, like when I started Apple, and it was 2019, and so we were still in the habit of like plotting off full-size drawings to do designs on. And then in COVID, working from home for a while, like everything kind of switched to Bluebeam, which is still what I'm using, but there's kind of a habit formation of getting really zoomed in on an area on Bluebeam to do a design, and then you zoom out and you're kind of like, oh yes, I forgot about the rest of the site. And
I have to have another 5 inches.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I was like, this one little square is designed perfectly, and it doesn't fit with like the rest of the stuff. So that was a fun learning curve too.
Yeah, and for myself, it was a bit more of a darker path, but I was new in engineering, and we had kind of messed up on a larger project, and it was for a developer. And I was dragged into this meeting, and we sat down, and this developer went up one side of us and down the other. And, some of the biggest things that he had said to us during that whole project was, the amount of money that he had on the line, and I'm paying this for that, and I'm paying this for that. And, I am paying interest, and this is where the money's coming from. And it became very real at that moment that people have a lot on the line for a lot of these projects.
Yep.
That, it's essential that I'm taking the time to ensure that, the designs are correct and well thought out, as well as, economical for the developer. And so, for me, that was the welcome to engineering. Like, you better get this stuff.
We're hearing the actual numbers behind. You're not just getting asking a few keys, right?
Yeah, and
it's real life.
Yeah, you can design what you want all day, and this would be nice and that would be nice, but when it comes down to dollars and cents, and you're staring at that client in the face and telling them this is what it's going to cost you, or we messed this up, yada yada yada, that it becomes very real very quickly. And so it was a very hard lesson in what that means for everybody and throughout the process, because it costs other consultants money, or could cost other consultants money, your developer, our own company money. So it's about making tactful decisions and being well thought out through the entire process to ensure that you're giving them the best design that you can with what you have available.
Yeah, exactly. So now moving, I guess, on to a little bit more of a positive note on that. What makes you keep coming back to engineering and to Applin specifically?
I like the problem solving. Like, there's the highs and lows of the everyday. Some projects go better than others, but ultimately it's the problem solving between coordinating all the different disciplines and contractors, as well as your coworkers and peers, and then looking at, like we talked about before, looking at a design, getting the information, deciding what you want to do, taking people's vision, and trying to bring that to fruition. So,
yeah, I think for me, I have a bit of a background in oil and gas. And so for me, like the reason I didn't like that industry and what I really like about this, land development industry in Applin is that it's designs in your community. You're improving your community. You can work on a project, in the office and drive to site to see it being built, or, drive past it on your way home or going somewhere and feeling like you're actually kind of improving where you live, I find really rewarding. And then at Applin specifically, like in the Calgary office, we take on like a pretty big range of projects, from like subdivisions to, private site, residential, commercial, some school projects and things like that. So it's like you're kind of impacting a lot of different areas in your community, not just like, oh, I built subdivisions only, or, I only, do Tim Hortons drive-throughs, or, whatever it may be. It's like kind of a wide range that kind of keeps it rewarding, because no two project is the same. So
yeah, I think I would probably say the same thing as well for myself. It's being able to change what we currently have in our landscape for the future and making it, because that's what you're designing for, right? Whenever you're doing something, it's not going to be built for 5, 10, 15, could be 20 years. You have no idea, right? But you're building it for the future, and that's what you're changing for, right? It's not for you currently. It's for the people. It's for the generations that are coming. So I think that for sure is probably personally what I would say is the most rewarding. Is there any advice you would give to your younger self or to any up-and-coming staff that you would like them to take with them and to keep with them as they kind of move on and advance through their career? Or it could even be words of encouragement for people that, or for the younger generation that does want to kind of get into this field.
Just a general piece of advice: never be too hard on yourself. You're going to make mistakes. That's part of learning. It's part of the process. Take your licks. Try to take, the lessons from them as best you can, and move forward. You always have to be moving forward. And if you're hard on yourself and you worry about what you did, or the mistakes you made in the past, you'll never get anywhere. So it's don't be too hard on yourself. We've all been through that. We were all amateurs at one point or another. So people have to start from somewhere. You'll get there one day. Just don't be too hard on yourself.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing too, is you only know what you know, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't be blamed for something that you didn't have any knowledge of, right? And I think that's the biggest thing, is don't be afraid to learn more or to seek out other opportunities and gain as much experience as you can, and move from there.
yeah, and I think too, kind of to tie what you two just said, like you don't know what you don't know, and so if it's your first time going through a design or some sort of process, and you made a mistake because you didn't know all the information, like that's totally fine. You weren't supposed to know all the information the day you graduated, right? Yeah. So I think just like allowing yourself to kind of get comfortable with making mistakes or asking questions, and then if you do realize that you've made a mistake somewhere along the way, I think just kind of advice would be bring it up as soon as you notice it, because I know personally I'll tend to fester on things. I'm like, oh no, like I screwed this up. I want to fix it before I go to anybody. And I think it's, always helpful to go to somebody with like, hey, here's a problem, and I think this is a solution. But like the sooner you can have that conversation, the easier it's going to be to deal with it rather than kind of just keeping it to yourself, freaking out that you screwed something up.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing too. That at the young, like by yourself too, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I know I did this wrong, or I think I have it. Because you generally have an idea where you know the problem's going to be.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can I try to figure out as much I can without telling somebody until like the very last, without me having a solution, right? And I think that's the best thing is as soon as you figure that out, or as soon as you see that, identify the problem. There's probably somebody not only within, say, for example, the Toronto office, but like we said, we have an abundant amount of resources company-wide and literally countrywide, right? That they probably are able to, or they've seen this issue before, they've seen this problem before, and they've had a solution to it.
Yeah, like I think, like Sean said, like everybody's been there. Like nobody got through their career, like, you know, to where they are in their career without making some mistakes along the way and being in the same position that maybe, you know, a newer graduate's in, kind of having that feeling of like, what am I supposed to do here? So everyone's kind of been there, and the earlier you can bring it up, then the earlier you guys can work together to find a solution.
Yeah.
So
I've certainly learned a lot more from the mistakes that I've made than I have from the things that I've done right.
Yep.
So, you know, it's
the bigger the mistake, the bigger they're like, oh, I'll never do that.
oh yeah,
That's
the most.
Yeah.
So as a smaller office in Calgary, do you guys have a favorite spot that you guys like to head to, whether it's on lunch, after work, around the office, that you guys like to do to celebrate, say, for example, a big design being finished? Is there something you guys like to do? Is there a post-design or a post-submission routine that you guys like to do?
Bring beer into the office.
yeah. Friday afternoon beers are usually a big one for us. You know, we will go out and celebrate as a group.
Yep.
When we do get those big submissions in, and even just when we get new people into the office and stuff, we try to bring everyone together to share in the.
Yeah, there's a pub not too far from the office that I think they have one of those cards. It's like, you know, you get stamped every 10 lunches, and I think a couple people have had like 5.
Oh, this
You're rolling now. Yeah.
I might want.
Yeah.
That's funny. And you know, I think it's an important thing to do, especially in the design process, because it's not only one person working on it, right? It's part of a team process, and I think the more you're able to build outside of the design process, the more you're actually able to learn about someone, about their habits. But okay, they might not be the strongest at this, but I know that they're able to do this well. That's what I can help them with, and that's what I can help them with design. And you only really learn about that when you actually get to know somebody outside of what they do for work, right? I think it's super important that you're able to get to know the person behind the computer and actually talk to them and what makes them tick and what makes them happy and all that, right?
Kind of goes back to what we were talking about with, you know, having a phone call with somebody, or you know, like now that we're sort of through COVID, quote unquote, you know, that you can actually sit down in meetings with people and you get that informality of being able to talk with somebody ahead of the meeting, ask them how their weekend was, what are you doing, you know, like how was your ski season, whatever it happens to be. And you know, taking your team out to celebrate these wins helps to, you know, debrief for one, as well as just have a chit chat with them outside of the actual project. You know, get inside their head, where, you know, what are they looking for in a project? You know, oh, I did like doing this. Okay, well, let's get you doing a little bit more of that then, and you can take that a little bit further and yeah, get in their head a little bit. So
awesome. Well, I think that's it for today. Thank you again, Sarah and Sean, for joining and sharing their knowledge, and thank you for listening to the Workshop. And stay tuned for our next episode. Have a great day.